Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our annual 1099 webinar. We'll give everyone a minute to roll in. We've got a couple people still coming in. The numbers are going up, so we'll give it a second before we get started. I'll go over all the requirements for the CPE credit as well as details on how we'll share the recording and the presentation post-webinar.
Catherine, I know I'm supposed to be muted, but I love seeing all the faces all over the country. The very geographically dispersed audience.
Yeah, we've got people from all over. Give everyone a couple more minutes. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So thanks again for joining us. This is our annual 1099 filing webinar, getting ahead, looking forward to filing for next year. Filing for this year, next year. We've got some dates coming up in the beginning of Q1, so we want to get ahead. Some quick tips and background when you're working with Zoom. I'm sure we're all familiar by now, but you have the ability to ask questions in the Q&A box. You have a chat function to send chats to us as the hosts and panelists that we can answer throughout, responding to you in the chat and also out loud to the rest of the group. And you have the ability to raise your hand as well. If there's any chats that don't get to us, feel free to send us a message. We'll share all of our contact information towards the end. And we're happy to help along the way if there's any technical difficulties. So you'll want to adjust your audio speakers. There's a mute and unmute. Again, I'm sure we're all familiar. If you're having trouble hearing us, ensuring that you have the right speaker selected, and testing the speaker to ensure that, again, you have the right speaker selected, adjusting volume, whatever you need to have a great experience today. So we do have a few requirements for CPE. You must actively respond to all of the polling questions today. We have 5 total. And you'll need to stay on for the duration of the broadcast, just about an hour, which will include a Q&A portion to open it up for some discussion once our presenters are done sharing their portions. Again, if you have technical difficulties responding to the polls, please send an email to elevate@armaninollp.com, and they can support you to ensure that you receive credit for today. Include your name and the date of the session. Today is November 29th, along with your polling response to the question that you weren't able to respond to. All right, I'm going to pass it over to Eric. He's going to be our host today, and he'll run through our learning objectives.
Thanks, Catherine. Before we do that, thank you all for joining. We're closing in on 498 participants. There it is, we're at 500. This is my favorite webinar of the year. It's our 5th annual one. Thank you all for attending, and I hope to see you next year. If this is not your first one, please put in the chat how many you have attended. 1099 webinars, not total webinars. And I want to make this really interactive. So we've got 3 experts. We'll do introductions in a minute, but as you have questions, please ask them. We do have a FAQ that we'll share. So we didn't want to give you a bunch of slides that just have content information you have to read while you're listening. So be confident that you will get all the dates, the facts that we cover in here. But if you do have something that's, that's interesting, please ask, and we'll either refer you to the FAQ that'll be shared, or we'll answer that question. And if they're really complicated, we'll probably follow up with you after, because as with many things with tax, sometimes the answer is depends. So our learning objectives are going to be to build the strategies to avoid the usual year-end rush and bandwidth problems. Hopefully all of you are a process person like me, not an outcome. I don't like fire drills. I like to do everything ahead of time, because that deadline is very tight. We're going to help you prepare to meet it. It is January 31st. And our last learning objective is how you can streamline processes to avoid stress and what can be very onerous and large late fees. Should we go to the next one? Here we go. So we have over, roughly 50 years of experience at Armanino today. Max is the new guy. He's only been with us for 4 years. He's a senior consultant in our Center of Excellence in Boise, Idaho. Nikki is next, 10 years. She's in our CFO advisory practice. And then Rebecca started when she was 8, because she has 28 years of service. She's in our client management program. She's outstanding. I'm somewhere in the middle there at 9. I keep getting close to Nikki, but never actually catch her. But these are 3 experts that are you should get a lot out of. Max is new this year. Nikki and Rebecca have done this for a couple of years, but Max has been, while not on this webinar, in the background in the 1099 process for years. All right, let's move on. Okay, we've covered learning objectives. Now we're going to talk addenda. Again, meeting the tight deadline file, strategies to avoid the fire drill. A big part of this is getting the data out of the ERP. We're all on ERPs now, how we can help you get the data out. We talk about 1099s over and over again, but really this is all of the informational compliance forms. And that includes 3921s, and those can get a lot more complicated than your typical 1042s and 1099s. We were talking about this earlier, prepping, and I remember about 15 years ago, there was a motion to make every company file a 1099 for every vendor. I think it died on the House floor, but the 1099s I think are a little unusual because they tweak it every year, and we're going to talk about what those updates are this year. And then again, the FAQ. So if we have time, we're going to cover the FAQs, but then we'll also dive into any questions that or maybe needed a little more answering at the end. So we're going to ease into this. We're going to talk upcoming deadlines, and Max is going to go first.
Thanks, Eric. Go back to that last slide. So there's a few deadlines to keep in mind. The biggest deadline to worry about is January 31st. It's the one that Eric just alluded to. That's the one that's coming up really quickly, and that's the deadline for your 1099 NEC filing. It's also the deadline to furnish recipient copies for any 1099 form type, as well as 3921s and 3922s. So that's the one that is coming up really quick, the one that we really want to get you prepared for. The next deadlines are February 29th. That is the deadline to paper file any 1099 forms with the exception of the 1099 NEC. The NEC is due on the 31st of January, whether you paper file or e-file. But all other form types, if you paper file, are due on February 29th. And then March 31st is the deadline for all other 1099 forms if you e-file them. So 3 major deadlines to keep an eye on, but the 31st of January is really the one that's coming up quickly and probably the one that impacts the most people. So how do you go about meeting these deadlines? The key is to start planning for them now. There's a lot of things you have to do to prepare for 1099 filing season, making sure that you have all the W-9s for your vendors. If you need to e-file, making sure that you have a TCC code that can take up to 45 days to get. So these are things that you want to be doing now and not waiting until mid-January when you have a million other things on your plate to worry about. So just think about it now, start preparing for it, and then January can be a breeze from there. if you decide to come and work with Armadillo on your 1099 filings, now is also the best time to start working with us. We are happy to take any kind of help you through this process starting in December. So go to the next slide here. Eric, I believe.
So just to clarify, we don't put the deadlines on here because we don't want to burden you with reading and listening at the same time. All the deadlines are in the FAQ section. We are at our first polling question, which is, when do you collect W? Oh, this is the fourth one. Are we going to go out of order? Should I do this one or? All right. This is an exciting one. When do you collect your W-9s? Before your first payment to the vendor, in December, in January, right before you do your 1099s, or is this a learning experience for you and you're not quite sure what a W-9 is yet? Okay. There's really no correct answer here. I think best practice is before that first payment to the vendor. That's when you have the leverage to actually make them give you the W-9. But when that does fall through, it's better to do it in December than January when you're trying to close out the year. All right, thank you all. Let's move to the next section, which is why we're here today.
So the primary reason that we're here today is that make sure you're prepared and ready to file in January. Like I mentioned before, there's a lot going on for year end. 1099s are rarely the thing on the top of everyone's mind. So we want to make sure that you're ready and you have the information you need. And a big piece of that is the IRS makes changes every single year. And we want to make sure that you are aware of those changes. The first one I want to talk about is an e-filing requirement change that was made this year. So historically, you were required to e-file if you were filing more than 250 forms. Anything under that, you have the option to e-file or paper file. There was talks last year about lowering this threshold to 100 forms. They skipped that step entirely and went straight to 10. So if you file 10 or more forms this year and moving forward, you are required to e-file those forms. And that impacts a lot of businesses. There's a lot of people who are in that 15 to 20 form range that may have been paper filing. So just you want to make sure you're prepared and have a plan to get those e-filed. There are also significant upcoming changes to the 1099-K form. So the 1099-K form is a form that credit card companies, online marketplaces, payment apps will send when you make a payment through them, basically. So the threshold historically has been $20,000 and 200 or more transactions to a particular recipient in a calendar year. Anything under that, and you are not required to file. This time last year, the IRS had determined that they were going to lower that threshold to $600 and no limit on the number of transactions. And then on about December 29th, they delayed it by a year. Now, over this last weekend, they have delayed it again by another year. So for this year, the $20,000 threshold and the 200 form threshold still applies. There are no changes as of right now. Now, the IRS has implemented a plan to kind of phase down to that $600 threshold that they do want to get to. As of now, they are planning to change it to $5,000 starting with next year. But as we've seen now over the last 2 years, these things are subject to change. So it's something to start planning for, but understand that this can change anytime in the next year. There has also been talks over the last several years of a 1099 digital asset form coming. As of now, the IRS has determined that that will probably come around in 2025. So no changes there yet, but also something to keep an eye on and start thinking about if that would impact you at all. And then the last thing I have on here is change in penalties. So they have increased a little bit this year, as they do for most years. So if you file a return late, but it is within 30 days, that penalty can run up to $60 per form. If it is over 30 days, that can run up to $120 per form. If you don't file your forms at all, and the IRS ultimately holds you in what they call intentional disregard, that penalty can be $630 per form. So the example that's given here is if you have 100 1099s that you're supposed to be filing and you just neglect it and put it off and never file them, that can be up to a $63,000 penalty, which is significant. So the key is make sure you're filing on time, but if you don't do it on time, you still want to make sure you're not ignoring these penalties. There are maximum penalties for both small businesses and large businesses. However, that intentional disregard, there is no maximum penalty. So it can be really punitive and it's best to avoid it at all costs.
Hey, Max, I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
I think they're the same, but I'll read them out loud if that's all right. So regarding the 10 or more threshold, let's say we have 8 employees on W-2s and we have 5 1099s to file. Will we be required to file electronically since our total would be 13, or does the 10 threshold only apply to the 10 or more 1099s?
The IRS language is that it only applies to the 1099s. So in that case, you could still paper file, as long as your 1099 threshold does not exceed 10.
Okay, thanks. And then next one is a 10, oh, this is a good one. 10 forms, good, similar, but different. 10 forms per type of form. So like 10 1099 NECs, 10 1099 miscellaneous, or 10 forms that get reported on a 1096. And is the infamous W-2G included in the 10 form minimum?
So it's 1099 forms overall. So if you file 5 divs and 5 MISCs and 5 NECs that are all falling under the same EIN, you would be required to e-file those. W-2G is generally considered an informational return, as is 1099s and 3922s. The answer on that one, I would have to get back to you and confirm. My assumption is that yes, it would be included in that threshold, but I don't want to give an answer without knowing for sure. So that's something that I can write down and send out to the group after this.
Okay, so the next one, I think there's a little confusion here. If a vendor is paid less than 20,000 over the year, we don't need to file a 1099?
So that is only applicable to the 1099K form, and I apologize for any confusion there. So a 1099K is basically if you were to pay, say, your accounting firm by credit card, you do not issue a 1099K or a 1099 to that accounting firm. The credit card company is responsible for it because they're ultimately making the payment, and that's what a 1099K is. So it really only impacts payment apps, credit card companies, things of that nature. Now for you, for any payments that you're making that are not on a credit card, the threshold is $600 for the 1099 NEC. So if you make a payment to a contractor of $600 or more, that is your threshold. So I apologize for that confusion. It was specific to 1099K. The rest of the 1099 forms, the thresholds have not changed. And the NEC, which is the most common form, is $600.
Thanks, Max. So there's another question about the different types of 1099 forms. We're not going to go into that because there's a lot and some of them are really specific and just not used very much. So I think we could spend the whole time going down the wormhole, rabbit hole of 1099 forms. There is a question about filing e-file if you usually file with paper. What are the options there, Max?
So if you would like to e-file, you have a couple of options. The first is you can get a TCC code. You apply for that with the IRS, and then you e-file it through the IRS's fire system directly. I mentioned it briefly at the beginning, but getting that TCC code does take time. 45 days is their estimate. So if you were to apply it this week, you would get it sometime in mid-January. And I know that's cutting it close already. Your other option is you can use an accounting firm or a 1099 software. So if you do your 1099s through a firm, they will have their own TCC code. Accounting softwares also have their own TCC codes, 1099 softwares. So there are options if you don't want to get your own TCC code and make that wait. There are businesses that can do it for you as far as the e-filing aspect.
All right, thanks a ton. And to the listeners, some of you joined a little late. As a reminder, we will send this webinar and the materials out afterwards. And the questions are streaming in, and I want to give Nikki and Rebecca plenty of time. So when Max shifts off to mute and they start talking, he's going to go through these questions and respond to you. So we will be answered, but just we're going to move on from this section. Thank you all for the participation. This is great. We're at 593. I really hope we hit 600.
Yeah, this is
Okay.
awesome. Appreciate all
Thanks,
the questions. So are you ready? What do you need to do to get ready if you're not? The key is if you have not already been gathering W-9s throughout the year as you bring on your vendors, you want to be doing that now. It can be really frustrating to try and track down W-9s from vendors in January when there's, like I said, a lot going on and you need that information to file. So start thinking about that now, start reaching out, make sure that you have all the W-9s that you need. As I kind of alluded to before, if you do need to get a TCC code to e-file your forms, you want to be doing that now as well to make sure that you have enough time to actually get that code in e-file. You want to make sure that your accounting systems are set up correctly, that you can pull all the data that you need, that any 1099 IRS updates are kind of being accounted for appropriately. We'll go into kind of how Armanino can help a little bit later, but Armanino is able to help you with your 1099 filing as well as other informational returns such as 3921, 3922s, 1042s, and 1042s. So if you need someone to work through this with you, we're going to be there for you and help you along the way.
Okay, polling question number 2. We're going to leave this up for a while because we do have almost 600 people on the call. Everybody get ready. We're about to share it. Here it is. Number 2, when does the IRS plan to start implementing changes to the 1099K filing threshold? And what will be the proposed threshold? The filing threshold will change to $600 starting in tax year 2024. The filing threshold changed to $600 starting in tax year 2023, current year. The IRS plans to change the filing threshold to $5,000 for tax year 2024 and phase it to $600 in future years. And option number 4, the IRS changed the filing threshold to $5,000 for tax year 2023 and will phase it to $600 in future years. And Catherine, let's give it a couple minutes because we got some feedback that we did go a little fast on the last one. Thank you for the head nod.
Maybe you can do a countdown, 10, 9, 8 when you're ready, or 5, 5, 4, 3. Closing.
That's good. I'm gonna watch the computer clock, and when it ticks over to the next minute, I'll do the countdown. But I'll start with 20. Catherine, are you seeing a lot of results in?
Oh yeah, we still got some people,
Is it still all right?
but
So
it's
you can
slowing
watch
down.
this.
I think we got everybody. Let's look at these results.
All right, 3, 2, 1. Okay, the filing threshold, we got 21 for A, 19% for B, 50% for option C.
So the 50% here are correct. So the IRS plans to change the filing threshold to $5,000 starting next year. Like I mentioned before, that can be subject to change, but right now that is the plan.
So Max, is this covered in the FAQs?
It is not, because this was just done over the weekend, but I will add something to it before this is sent out.
Thanks. So yeah, so these are always changing. Usually we have this webinar in November. Scheduling didn't work out this year, so thankfully we had it now, because if we had done it in November, it would have been stale as of Monday morning. So thanks, Max. Let's go on to the next topic.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for attending today. We want to make your 1099 processing as easy as possible for you this year. Armanino can assist our clients with your ERP data extract to support the 1099 template format that will be provided by our 1099 compliance team. So it's important that the data coming out of your ERP matches the 1099 template format. So for those of you that may use Dynamics GP, it will typically require a software upgrade by applying the 2023 year-end update in order to print 1099s out of GP, which can be costly and disruptive to your business. So the Armanino 1099 service is a great alternative to upgrading your GP for 1099 processing needs. Our customer success team can help with the data extract out of GP or even other ERPs such as Dynamics 365 FSC, Business Central, Sage Intacct, NetSuite. Even these cloud-based ERPs for e-filing with the IRS, you still need a third-party service to e-file. So the Armanino 1099 service is a great option for this. I know in the chat and some of the questions people were asking sort of about that e-filing. So again, right, with a 10 or more threshold this year, does require to e-file. So Armanino can help with that e-filing if you do need that help. If you choose to use work with us and through the Armanino 1099 service, and if you need help getting the data out of your ERP into the 1099 template format, you can create a ticket in our customer success portal with your current login, or just by sending an email to the support services at armaninollp.com email address. And just note in the subject header that you would like the Armanino 1099 service support. And our customer success team will reach out to you for any next steps. Additionally, there's more information provided on the Armanino 1099 landing page on our website. And the contact information is noted here on the slide as well. And contact information, will be provided through the, I think through the FAQ as well. And this deck will be sent out, so you have the contact information. All right, Nikki.
All right, on to me. So I'm covering your stock-related equity type tax events for the year. And here I have listed the primary, the main, standard type of events that you would have to deal with on the tax end. The first being your non-qualified stock option exercises. So those will be taxed at the time of exercise. Vesting of restricted stock units and restricted stock awards, both taxed at time of vest, and depending if you have any deferrals. For the restricted stock awards, you could have an election of an 83B where taxes would be made upfront prior to vesting. So at the date of issuance, the employee or whomever receives the awards would be taxed. All right, so what is tax? So on the next slide, I'll speak to, what the underlying tax is on these sorts of events. So for the disqualified stock options, it's going to be the spread at time of exercise. So on the date of exercise, it would be your underlying stock fair market value, less any exercise prices, which are typical with options. So that spread, if it's positive, would be income. On your 1099 for non-employees, W-2 for employees, so that's at income tax rates. Similarly, income tax rates for your RSU vest events. Usually the RSUs don't have a purchase price like an option, but if they do, then it would be your spread on that date of vest or on the deferral date of release. And that's typically, again, your fair market value less any cost. If you have incentive stock options, I'll speak to that in an upcoming slide, but there is no immediate tax consequence for exercising those types of options. So that's for your year-end 3921s, which I'll get to in a bit. That spread, as long as it's a qualifying ISO exercise, would be subject to alternative minimum tax. and otherwise no income tax until they sell at a later date and within the requirements. All right. Now, employee stock purchase plans, if they're qualifying, are not subject to tax, similar to ISOs. And a nice thing, also not subject to AMT, so alternative minimum tax. That spread, so when the employee makes the purchase under the ESPP, the actual purchase at the end of the offering, that holding, that value will be used for later in a later selling event. So depending on the subsequent transactions of sale. For qualified ESPPs, you have a holding requirement to not be taxable, and that's 2 years from the offering date and 1 year from the purchase date. And it's not typical for having a non-qualifying ESPP plan, but if that is the case, then you are subject to income tax on the date of purchase. And that's, again, fair market value at time less the purchase cost, which should be less, hopefully. All right, so next slide here, incentive stock options. So we'll go back again here to the details of these. Again, and not subject to income tax if they're remain a qualifying event, and that is in the third bullet there. To be qualified, they're of course issued to an active employee, and they're held. The shares that are exercised are held at least 2 years from grant date and 1 year from the exercise date. Similar to ESPP, that spread, if they're later sold, that will give you your basis for a tax assessment at that time. All right, so as I mentioned, the non-qualifying option exercises, restricted stock vest. Those are all going to be, you're going to be taxing that at the 1099 or W-2 level at the time of transaction, ideally. For the ISOs, incentive stock option, qualifying exercises, and ESPP, nothing to do at the time of transaction. At the end of the year, you're going to be putting together 3921 statements for your ISO exercises, 3922 statements for your ESPP purchases. And filing deadlines are the same as other forms, 1099 forms. You want to get your statements out to the employees and the vendors by the end of January. Paper filings with IRS at the end of February, and we've got a leap year next year, so you got actually February 29. So one more day, and then for your e-filing, March 31. All right, so I'll go to our next polling question here. What we got, Eric?
All right, everybody get ready. Number 3 is coming up. Okay, it's interesting, Nikki, you usually get peppered with really complex questions during your presentation, and you didn't this year.
Yeah, I was going to look in the sec here on the request, of course,
No, maybe there's a lag. They're asking Rebecca some interesting questions. What type of event is not immediately subject to income tax if qualifying? An incentive stock option, otherwise known as an ISO exercise, an ESPP purchase, an RSA vest, if 83B is selected, or all of the above. Oh, the response is, oh, we have one person that can't see the polling question. Can everybody else see the polling question? Or hopefully we get
one more person to say they can see it. Okay, so we got a few yeses here. Okay, so maybe Janet.
Yeah, if anyone's having trouble seeing, just we'll send out the question and you can send your response. If you were able to respond to other questions, we can include that for the credit.
But also, if you clicked on another item, maybe click on the Zoom icon, and then it should pop it up because it'll be like a chat. And so maybe something happened there.
Yeah, or possibly you have the
I'm not saying I'm seeing the polling question number 3 slide, but not the actual questions on my view right now.
Yep, panelists and hosts are unable to see the polling question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they can't vote, which I don't agree with. I feel like I should be able to vote.
That would just be cheating.
Like, are you paying attention?
Most of the time.
I'm curious to see our answers here. All right, good job, people. I got all of the above. Yes, that was a trick question. If in doubt, all of the above is what the college rule, I think. Yeah, so pretty much all of these, are, with your RSA, that's the trick was, it's the RSA vest versus the 83B is you're going to be taxed on the date of grant, not the vest. So that's the little distinguishment there. Yeah, and as I mentioned, ESPP and incentive stock options, which is nice, for your employees. That's one less thing to have to pay out for. Of course, when you do have events where they are taxable, there are some remedies, withhold shares to cover for the taxes. So that's one we see a lot of our clients making use of. So there's less of a burden on the employees to pay out cash. Awesome. We're on to our next slide here.
So how can Armanino help you with your 1099s? Everybody needs flexibility in January. It's a busy time for everyone. This is not something that people are super psyched about. It's not something they're looking forward to in January. It's kind of one of those things that you just have to do. So Armanino has some 1099 service options if you would like to work with us. We have two. One is a basic service. Basically what this is we provide you with a template where you go through, fill out your vendor data, your payment amounts, and hand it over to us. From there, we will handle e-filing with the IRS. We will distribute your recipient copies. We will file with any applicable states. We will do TIN matching with the IRS. We will do USPS address verification. Basically, we will make sure that everything gets done for you and then send you a secure file with your 1099 forms that you can keep for your records, and it's totally hands-off. You don't have to worry about getting a TCC code. You don't have to worry about any of these e-filing requirements because we handle it all for you. The second one is the optional enhanced service. So this has all of the same deliverables as a basic service, but we will help you scrub your vendor data. We will make sure that you have total W-9 compliance, that you're not missing W-9s. If you have questions on how certain payments should be classified, if you don't know what forms to use, stuff like this, we are happy to help with that. So that's what is included in our optional enhanced service. I would recommend that if you want to use the optional enhanced service, get started sooner than later. We will accept these really through the end of the year. The basic service we will accept throughout January as well, but with the optional enhanced, we want to make sure that we can give the time that you need to make sure that you are ready to go when January comes. So go to the next slide here.
Go back. I have a couple questions. Yeah. I'm going off script, Catherine. Put in my annual review. The easy one, Max, someone asked, how much would this service be? Can you?
Yeah, so it's a range and it's based on number of forms. So we will have, Rebecca just dropped our landing page into the chat. If you go to that landing page, it will have additional information about the services, but also information on the pricing. So there's basically tiers of ranges, 1 to 20, 20 to 40. If you fall in that certain range, that's your price. So go to that website, it'll all be in there.
Okay, I have two more questions.
And just to piggyback on that, one sort of important, I guess, little caveat, I don't say caveat, but it is based on per entity. So, if you have 1 or 2 forms in one entity, maybe not as, cost effective in a sense, but if you have, number of entities with a handful of forms, it's, most companies find it very, very beneficial, but just to note, and it does state it out there, but it is based on per entity.
Yes.
Thanks, Rebecca. Max, there's been a ton of questions about how and where people can get a TCC number.
So you apply for that directly through the IRS. We can, if you would like, send out a link to where you do that. So basically, if you want to do it directly through the IRS, through their fire system, that's what you need. The alternatives are services like Armanino's, or if you go and find a 1099 vendor, these people all have their own TCC code. There are options to e-file and stay within that compliance of 10 or more forms you have to e-file without getting a TCC code. But if you do want to do it and go directly through the IRS, it'll be directly through the IRS's website where you'll go and fill out some information about your business, and they will eventually give you a TCC code. I will send that out with this. We can add it to the Q&As.
Awesome, thanks. And so asking for a friend, let's say I lost my TCC, I misplaced it. How would I find that?
That's a good question. You would likely need to get in contact with the IRS to determine that. I would have to follow up and see exactly what that would look like, because I would imagine it's not particularly easy.
Yeah, I would suggest if you don't find it, if you don't know where it is, ask that question now. It may take some time.
Yeah.
To get it, you may have to get it in writing. It may take a while. You may have to do some identity verification. And the last question for now, I reserve the right to ask additional questions, was what about vendors that have been paid via AP, but also paid via credit cards?
Yeah, so if you make payments to a vendor in both ways, you are only going to include the payments that you made like through AP directly on your 1099. So say you made $10,000 through check, $10,000 through credit card, so $20,000 in payments throughout the year. On your 1099, you will only include $10,000 of that. If there is a 1099K filing obligation, the credit card will deal with that. You don't have to worry about any credit card 1099 transactions.
That's great to know. That's kind of intuitive, kind of nice. I would have thought you'd have to mash those up together, but I guess actually that would be double counting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so ultimately, if you're wondering who the 1099 needs to go to, it's follow the money. Where is the cash truly being distributed? The credit card company is paying the vendor in the situation, and you're getting a credit, and you ultimately have to pay it back to the credit card company. But they're ultimately the one making the payment, and that's why it is that way.
Awesome, thanks. So we had one participant that said they called the IRS and it only took 30 minutes. So that's good for the IRS. So I would call now because that's better than it usually is in the first quarter.
Yeah, that's outstanding.
Because I've heard of 8 hours. I've heard of calling first thing in the morning. That was probably during the PPP days, but it can get long. And then someone else asked, I'm going to ask this one. I think it's an easy one. Do you have to be the owner of the business, or can this be delegated to the employee who is not an owner to get that TCC number?
They will likely need information on the owner of the business. So I would say that's probably the safest bet, but you can delegate it, I would imagine, as long as that person has the information they need. They might need a social security number, but generally speaking, they're going to want some information on the owner.
Oh, I get a good follow-up one.
Yeah.
What if they've used a bank card, not a debit card, but a bank card, EFT, and check? Would all those be included, or would they need to be bifurcated?
I believe those would all be included in that situation, as long as it's not a credit card.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, because all running through the bank account,
Yep.
through your operations account or something
Yep.
close to it.
If the money comes out of your account, then you're ultimately going to be the one making or issuing the 1099. If it went from your account to the vendor.
Excellent. Okay, so now we're going to go to the polling question, and we're going to go to question number 1 because we did question number 4 in the beginning. So everybody get ready. It will pop up as a separate screen, so we'll give you time to find that. This is why it was number 1. Are you ready to file your 1099s? And the options are yes or no. And while you're answering that, I will say that, we're at 14 minutes. We'll probably have time But if we don't, and you have some questions that were unanswered, we will be reaching out to you to answer those questions. So no worries there. Are the answers piling in, Catherine?
Oh, yeah. All right, let's take a look.
Excellent. Team, how's that compare to past years?
I think they're usually a little bit less prepared, so we must be doing a good job, but
Yeah.
maybe it's because the end of the presentation, so
Oh, yeah, I
everybody's
was
feeling
gonna
more
say
confident.
the timing was good. I wonder what it would have been at the beginning of the presentation.
Oh, maybe that's an improvement for next year.
Yeah, we could have it on both ends, the same question twice.
Yeah, we got good coverage with 570 people if 515. So sure not everybody needs CPE. Let's go to next steps.
Yeah, so I believe Rebecca put the link into the chat earlier. I can put it in again just so it's at the top there. If you would like to work with Armanino on your 1099s, go to that website. It has additional information about our services, about pricing. It has a pre-filled engagement letter on there. All you need to do is download that, fill out your information, and send it over to us. We will confirm receipt and we'll have one of our experts reach out to you. It's a really simple process, and more simple processes is what we're all looking for throughout January. So we're happy to help you and give you whatever support you need.
Thanks, Max. Okay, so we have a little bit of extra time. So we'll share. This is I'm not on here. These guys are the experts. I'm just here to talk and help pass through the screens. But I always like trying to stump this team. So I have a good one here about healthcare premium payments. So for healthcare premiums payments that our company makes, there's a service fee that our healthcare provider pays on our behalf to a third party. Is our company required to file a 1099 for the service fee that is paid on our behalf?
No, you are not. So if it's paid on your behalf by somebody else, they have the obligation. So if you're not the one spending the money, then you would not.
Excellent. And I do want to, for any of you that missed the polling question before you jump off, there is one last polling question just so you can have the best coverage to make sure you get CPE. Want to make sure you ask that. There's been a couple questions about how often you should refresh the W-9s of your vendors, Max.
Yeah, so best practice is to do it every single year. Information can change, the business might move, have a new address. So we always recommend that starting in January, you go back and you get your tenant or your W-9s for all your existing vendors. And then throughout the year, as you have new vendors, it's best to get those W-9s before you make a payment. It's the easiest time to get them. So do it as you go, be proactive, don't be reactive in this because they can build up, and trying to track down 100 W-9s at the end of the year is never fun.
No, it's the opposite of fun during your busiest time. So Max, this is a good one because there's been a lot of changes every year. We covered federal changes, but we had a question about the state filing requirements and what a good resource is to understand what those are, because I don't know, in today's connected small world, we have vendors all across the country, most likely, if not the world. Well, what is someone supposed to do when they're paying in more than their local state?
Certainly. And yeah, vendors all over the country. I mean, you could have 10 different 1099s to 10 different states, which means 10 different obligations, right? So there are a lot of states that participate in the combined federal state filing program. So oftentimes, if you file federally, the IRS will share that with the applicable states, and there's not a requirement. A big part of when that changes is if there's withholding, you often are also additionally required to file with the state. And there are other particular states that still want you to file with them every year, whether there's withholding or not. I can send out a good resource to get that information after this, but the reality of it is it changes state to state, and really going through 50 of them, it's going to be different with every single one. But I can send out a link with a resource that has that information.
Okay, another good one is, or I keep saying good one, I guess they're all great. What are the requirements for 1099s for S and C corps?
You are not required to issue a 1099 to a corporation. So the only exception is if they are a law firm or in healthcare. So other than that, corporations you can just ignore entirely. You do not need to issue a 1099. Now, there's no penalty if you do. When in doubt, you can file it. The IRS is going to come back at you and say, you paid these people and their corporation, so we're going to penalize you because you issued a 1099, but that is not required.
Okay, one last question, promised about W-9s. If the vendor gives you a W-9 with incorrect information, who's on the hook for that? We all get those notices randomly through the year where the information we provided to the IRS doesn't match the information they have. Who's on the hook for that?
If you have a signed W-9 from the vendor, then it would ultimately be them. And it is important that you retain that, because that is your proof that you went out and got the information that you need. We see it pretty frequently where maybe a business is issuing a 1099 to a company and they never got a W-9, but they have the tax information. Well, if the tax information is wrong and you don't have a W-9, the IRS is going to put that on you. But if you have that signed W-9, ultimately it's going to be on them. Now, you will still need to go back and request a new one to update that information, but you won't be penalized for it.
All right. Thank you, Max, Rebecca, Nikki, Catherine. And thank you all for attending. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. People discount 1099s. I think it's great. It's a great exercise. If you have any questions, we are here for you. We will share the content, both the webinar and the presentation. I hope you all have a great holiday season and an amazing year-end and 1099 filing season.
Thank you all.
Thank you.